The primary reason I watch MLP, and pretty much the same reason I watch any fictional media, is because of the emotional content it presents. Character-driven conflicts which challenge their emotions, usually involving two or more people, where they learn something about each other or themselves, and that ultimately ties into a resolution where everybody becomes a better person. I like the sappy stuff. And MLP used to do this really well, especially in its earlier seasons. My favorite Season 1 episode, Look Before You Sleep, is a great example of this, where Rarity and Applejack are pretty much two polar opposite ponies on the personality spectrum, and they have to learn to get along after a storm brings them together in the same home. Nothing really outlandish happens. They spend most of the episode just bouncing off each other, with their two conflicting personalities bumping heads until eventually they give way to understanding. That may not sound like enough for a full 22-minute episode, but there are ways that things stay interesting. They're staying at an impartial third party's home, that being Twilight, and Twilight has never had a proper sleepover, so she tries to turn their little forced spat into a sleepover. And the sleepover games end up testing their relationships and personality even further. Again, nothing crazy has to happen, it's all fueled by characters. And that's the episode. Applejack and Rarity fight, a thunderstorm forces them to stay in the same place for a while, you learn more about their characters and how they're different through slumber party games, and eventually they reconcile when a tree falls through someone's window, which is the craziest thing that happens in the episode. There's just kind of a quaint innocence to the whole thing. It's pretty much entirely character driven, and it's about learning about these three ponies, though mostly Rarity and Applejack. It is the opposite of Try Hard. It's just about colorful little characters talking to each other, and then they learn something. It's a show for children, but it's well written, and it's lighthearted and sweet. All that's really needed for great emotional content is for you to have good characters, and for you to have faith that the characters are entertaining enough to hold an episode without anything crazy happening. Unfortunately, as the show went on and the writing got worse on average, they started to think that the characters weren't enough by themselves, especially in Season 5. So let's look at what happens when the substance of the emotional content is still there, but there's also a lot of unnecessary spectacle to muddy it. In Friendship is Magic, there are these three characters called the Cutie Mark Crusaders, who are obsessed with getting their cutie marks. Their cutie mark is a piece of clip art you get on your butt that tells you who you are, and they absolutely want one and will not stop until they get one. The idea being that they're too obsessed with growing up. A cutie mark is something that happens to you naturally as you get older. It's not something you're meant to obsess over, but that's the fun in their characters. But in this episode, one of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, Apple Bloom, starts to worry. What if her cutie mark is something she doesn't want it to be? What if she turns out to be someone she doesn't want to be? Kind of a scary thought. She's worried that getting a cutie mark will somehow alter her and make her unlovable to her friends and family. And this is great emotional content. It only gets better when Applejack tries to reassure her little sister.
Hush now, little sister, you're loved by all you know. You'll never lose their friendship, no matter where you go. There ain't no call to worry, so don't you cry or fret. A cutie mark won't change you, no matter what you get.
So it's established in universe that ponies just sing whatever they feel. Like, whatever they feel just turns into song, and it comes out sometimes. But even by the show's standards, that lullaby was pretty great. That was kind of amazing how well that came out. But Apple Bloom got the first piece of knowledge she needs to stop worrying. She knows that a cutie mark won't change her. But, you know, maybe she wants to know why it won't change her. She didn't really get a why out of that. And going to sleep with a head that heavy does have some problems. Fortunately, there's more dialogue later that I think is some of the best in the series to tell her why.
I guess I'm pretty worried about getting my cutie mark.
Well, that is the same as worrying about who you are. That is all a cutie mark is. If you cannot accept who you are, your life might seem like a bad dream.
But if I like who I am, do you think other ponies will too?
Of course.
Then it doesn't matter what my cutie mark is.
Indeed.
But that's so simple. I must be the only pony in the universe that's worried about her cutie mark.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
This exchange is so fucking beautiful. The way it flows together, the way it establishes lore for the world while simultaneously drawing real-life parallels to pretty much anybody who's ever worried about their identity. This is one of those moments where the show just was perfectly what it wanted to be. It taught an amazing lesson that applies not only to children, but pretty much every person on the planet, while simultaneously establishing in-universe more rules about how things work and why they're important to people. And of course, the solution is something that more people should be talking about. The solution is learning to love yourself. If you love yourself, other people will love you, but learning to love yourself is fucking hard. A lot of people worry about who they are and whether they're good enough. Loving yourself sounds a little too simple, a little too easy to be the solution to everything. But it affects pretty much every facet of your life. Personal security matters. Alright, episode's over. Learned some pretty heavy stuff. Learned how learning to accept yourself can color your entire life differently and influences the world around you in the biggest degree possible. No, there was a middle part we skipped over. We gotta go back and look at the middle part. So when Apple Bloom goes to sleep after Applejack sings her a lullaby, she has nightmares. Nightmares that her cutie mark is going to change her into something she doesn't want to be, and nobody will accept or love her anymore as a result. And it's really just wacky nonsense for the entire middle of the episode. There's very little of any emotional substance here. Normally people use dreams in fiction as a sort of method to look into the character's psychology. That doesn't really happen here. You're just being told that she's afraid over and over in various crazy circumstances. The nightmares only get more obnoxious and goofy as they go along, and it really feels like they just didn't have any idea how to finish the middle part of the episode, like they couldn't find any substance to put here. Which is weird, because they almost did it right. On occasion, there's a dark figure in the dreams who speaks to Apple Bloom, and the dark figure turns out to be Apple Bloom's shadow in the end. She's the one forcing herself to be scared instead of just accepting her life for what it is, and that whatever she gets as a cutie mark will be a reflection of her, not something that changes her into someone unlovable. But it's kind of really easy to lose the plot and purpose when so many of the dreams are just weird, goofy gimmicks. It's like watching Paranorman, which has a great setup and a great ending, but the middle part is just them fucking around with zombies. There was potential for there to be more heartfelt dialogue in these nightmare sequences, but instead it's just really goofy and over the top. Like they were worried that the characters interacting and having personal problems wasn't enough, and they needed to go super goofy really hard for some reason. This is one of the more tame examples, but it's a thing that happens all throughout Season 5. With a topic this heavy and intense, there's a little more room to have the characters interact and come to meaningful conclusions. You don't have to just have a couple paragraphs about it and then fill the rest of the episode with nonsense. But there's another episode later in the season that does pretty much the same thing, but worse. Do Princess's Dream is primarily a story about Princess Luna. Princess Luna is a character who's been through some shit. She was formerly the villain Nightmare Moon and was banished to the moon for 1,000 years. So her views on punishment and interacting with other ponies are a bit fucked up. Even after she was freed from the moon and gave up her villainous ways, she still created a creature called the Tantibus to torture herself in her dreams every night as further punishment. This is a much heavier setup than most for the show, and it already has a lot of emotional content. Because of what happened to Princess Luna in the past and her minimal healthy interactions with other ponies, you can definitely see her being someone who excessively punishes herself, both verbally and emotionally. And there's nowhere to go but up from here. The episode's going to be about her learning what it means to be punished, when punishment needs to stop, how to forgive yourself, and how to communicate your needs and pain in a healthy fashion with other ponies. Luna has to accept that she's not a monster anymore. She's a good pony and she needs to stop torturing herself. That's where the episode's going. And I was super excited to see how this episode would get there because there's a lot of potential. I saw Luna talking with the main 6 characters, and I was thinking about the potential of her going to confront her sister, because her sister is the one who banished her in the moon for 1,000 years, and it's why Luna's ideas of punishment and ideas of how consequences work on a fundamental level are so fucked up. Because the one time Luna faced any serious consequences, she was sent to the moon, an isolated prison in outer space for 1,000 years. It fucks with people. But instead of any of that, the entire middle of the episode is Luna just kind of dicking around in other ponies' dreams, because the Tantabus had escaped her own dreams and had started infecting other people's. It's just such an unnecessary twist on the premise. The episode could have easily been Luna talking with other ponies about the idea of self-punishment and her struggling with trying to admit she's a good person. But instead, the entire episode's about her going through other people's dreams and shooting lasers in futility at the Tantabus. And what little dialogue there is in the dream sequences is really awkward. Like, for some reason, Rainbow Dash is just Buttercup from the Powerpuff Girls in her dream, when that's not at all how her personality works. Like, what the hell's going on there? In Bloom and Gloom, I can see how someone might not be able to think of ways for Apple Bloom to have conversations with others about the core conflict. That's kind of difficult. But the concept in this episode, the idea of self-punishment and accepting that oneself is a good person and acknowledging your good qualities, there's just so much to do with that. There are so many endless conversations to be had with each of the ponies' personalities and how they might feel about self-punishment. There's a real opportunity to show someone legitimately being talked through severe trauma. And that is what's going on here, is severe trauma. It's pretty obvious. It's a little intense, honestly, how many times Luna brings up that she essentially hates herself. And I think it's fair to say that something like this deserves a lot of tact and grace in how it's handled, especially given that you're trying to teach these lessons to children, and it's a pretty damn heavy lesson to be talking about. So I think it's not just disappointing, but a little insulting that instead of the episode being about talking through her problems in a serious fashion that frankly the situation deserves, it's mostly memes. It's mostly memes and wacky action-adventure stuff in the entire middle of the episode. That being said, even though it's regrettable what the show does in the middle because it simply thinks that characters interacting is not enough anymore, the ending is absolutely worth the wait.
How can I forgive myself? I am no better now than I was then. My creation is about to turn the world into a living nightmare!
But look at what you're doing! Nightmare Moon would have wanted the Tantabus to turn Equestria into a nightmare. You're doing everything you can to stop it. Don't you see? That proves you're not the same pony you were then. Every pony who knows you knows that Nightmare Moon is in the past. We all trust you, Luna. Do you trust us enough to believe we're right?
That's some pretty heavy dialogue, and it does almost everything right. It does a lot of things right that some shows that try to tackle the same thing do pretty badly. Instead of the characters just being like, no, you should trust us, we're your friend, we know you're good, they provide a counterpoint to her concerns, the strongest counterpoint there is. Look at who you are right now. Look at the actions you're taking. Those are not the actions of a bad person. It's some powerful stuff, and it's a great scene, but it comes after like a bunch of walking houses and laser shooting and Big Mac turning into a princess. There's no reason the same conclusion couldn't have been reached after the middle of the episode was about talking, until Luna eventually has a breakdown when she can't quite confront that she's not a bad person anymore. At no point did the episode have to be about action-adventure and shooting lasers. It's trying too hard. It's putting too much spectacle in the spectacle and substance formula. It's just kind of afraid that characters talking isn't enough anymore to hold anyone's attention, and it's a shame. It's especially a shame in this episode because the junk that takes up the middle is worse than the junk that took up the middle of Gloom and Bloom. It's pretty much impossible to ignore how ridiculous the memes and fan service in the middle of this episode are. But this isn't the worst episode to muddy an incredibly good emotional conflict, because I've saved the best for last. It hasn't been lost on me that Do Princess's Dream and Bloom and Gloom are significantly more complex stories than Look Before You Sleep, in terms of the amount of things happening alone. In order to properly consume Do Princess's Dream, you have to know who Princess Luna is. Her backstory is Nightmare Moon. You have to come to grips with the fact that she created a magical creature to torture herself in her dreams. And even in Bloom and Gloom, which is significantly more simple, you still have to understand what cutie marks are and be there for the lore delivery alongside the more sentimental things. And because Do Princess's Dream and Bloom and Gloom have those more fantastical elements, it'd be kind of hard to rework them into something that focuses primarily on emotional content without some massive changes. Like Princess Luna going through the main 6 characters' dreams and blasting lasers at the Tantibus, that would just be replaced with several completely different scenes of talking. And Apple Bloom's dreams in Bloom and Gloom would need to be pretty much completely altered. And I admit that may not seem completely reasonable to expect, even though I think the show would be better off if instead of the crazy spectacle they went with, they focused more on quaint emotional development between the characters. I understand, maybe those aren't the right episodes for that sort of thing, even if the premise would suggest they are. But this next one is pretty much just a look before you sleep, but with a little extra. And that's really what this video is about, is it's frustrating to see episodes with such heartfelt and sweet premises turned into sort of a shitfest where you have to watch wacky shenanigans happen with no emotional substance just because the writers maybe thought characters talking wasn't engaging enough. A little too much extra. But that's enough of that. Let's move on to the last one. The premise of Brotherhooves Social is one that seems like it should be impossible to destroy. It's about Big Mac, Apple Bloom's older brother, feeling like he isn't a part of Apple Bloom's life anymore. Apple Bloom spends all her time with her big sister instead, and Big Mac and Apple Bloom haven't bonded in ages. It doesn't help that Big Mac is a very introverted person who has trouble expressing his feelings. He feels like he's growing distant from Apple Bloom and he wants to matter again. He gets his opportunity when it turns out that Applejack can't attend the Sisterhooves Social, which Apple Bloom was looking forward to going to. The Sisterhooves Social is a competition where sisters or those in a sibling-like relationship compete in friendly events in order to win a ribbon. And Apple Bloom can't go because Applejack doesn't want to go. From there, Big Mac figures he can replace Applejack at the competition, he'll go with Apple Bloom instead, and win Apple Bloom a ribbon, so he can be Apple Bloom's hero again. Be a real Big Brother role model like he used to be. And it's pretty obvious where the episode is going with this, but where it's going is great. I love the emotional content, I love the sappy stuff. Big Mac's going to compete in the competition, but he's going to be too overzealous in trying to win, so he's going to end up getting disqualified and looking like a fool, and he'll eventually have to confront Apple Bloom to tell Apple Bloom how he really feels and why he was behaving that way. Then they'll learn lessons about how to properly communicate their feelings with each other, everybody will be happy, and I'll get the episode I wanted. It's pretty much look before you sleep again. The middle part is interesting, but it's not interesting because it's crazy, it's interesting because it's about a misunderstanding between characters. Big Mac thinks he has to win a competition to get Apple Bloom's affection, but that's wrong, and that's where the conflict and interest comes from in the middle of the episode. Everything I said is technically true. That all technically happens. Do you want to guess how they fucked it up? Because they did. The answer is cross-dressing. The answer is cross-dressing. Of course it is. So it's actually established in the episode that you don't have to be a technical sister to attend the Sisterhooves Social. But in spite of that, Big Mac decides to dress as a mayor anyway. And what follows is pretty much every unfunny cross-dressing joke from every adult comedy ever made. It's just kind of offensive and disgusting. Him cross-dressing has no emotional depth and adds nothing to the conflict. It's not like he wants to be a mayor or anything like that. It's just purely for cross-dressing jokes. Because for some reason, the writer thought the characters interacting normally just wouldn't be enough. It's not entertaining enough that Big Mac is obsessed with winning for his sister. For some reason, we have to add cross-dressing. Now it's entertainment. There's even a scene where they draw explicit attention to his Adam's apple, and it's just like, what are you trying to say here, show? Because it seems like you're trying to say something real disgusting and mean in this episode, which was otherwise about a perfectly sweet and innocent conflict between siblings. And the worst part is that all the stuff that's great about the episode does actually happen. Eventually, Big Mac does cost them the competition because he's overzealous, and he has to open up to his sister, and they learn that they need to communicate better about their relationship needs. But you have to sit through 10 minutes of cross-dressing jokes right in the middle of the episode first. The resolution where they talk about their feelings was genuinely so well written and powerful that it managed to get tears out of me in spite of the 10 minutes of antics that came just prior. There was plenty here. The competition could have gone wrong just because Big Mac was overzealous about winning, and he misinterpreted how he could have Apple Bloom's affection. The truth was, he already had Apple Bloom's affection, and he just needed to express that he wanted to hear it more. There didn't have to be any cross-dressing. There didn't have to be. Apple Bloom didn't need to have a sequence of wacky nightmares, Luna didn't need to go around trying to shoot lasers at the Tantabus, Big Mac didn't need to cross-dress. You're a show about friendship and love, with heartfelt morals and beautiful characters that are all innocent and sweet. Why you gotta try so hard? Why you gotta try so hard to be something you're not? Just try to enjoy the simple innocence of a sappy story done right once in a while, like you did back in Season 1. I think things would have been a lot better.